Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at medcommsnetworking.com. So you'll find information, resources, activity services for the global medcoms community, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, and medical publishing. You'll find at the moment we're doing these webinars every week. It's a great way of involving people from around the world, both as an audience and on the panel. And today I'm delighted we've got 4 publishers with us to talk about publication extenders, enhancements to publications. I'm very keen, very pleased that we've been able to come along today with some case histories. I've asked them to come along with some case histories of stuff that's actually happening out there so that we can use that as the basis of discussion for how we use them in practice, how we extend the reach of publications. So each of them is going to come with a little case history. We can run through some slides, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A, and we'd invite the audience to come in with their questions, observations, and comments. So without further ado, we're going to start with Caroline. Introduce yourself, and I will share the slides from here. There you go.
Great, thanks, Peter. So hello, everybody. My name is Caroline Halford, and I'm the Digital Publishing Manager for ADIS, which is part of Springer Healthcare, which is part of Springer Nature. And the case study I want to talk about today is ADIS podcasts. So these are entirely audio articles where experts can talk about conference data, clinical trial data, or other expert opinions. We have 3 methods of creation of ADIS podcasts. They can either be commissioned by an editor, like a normal article, or they can be grant funded, where pharma fund the podcast topic, but they are completely hands-off in terms of content creation. Or we can accept these as regular unsolicited submissions, like any other article. We have several routes of dissemination of the podcasts. They are published as regular articles and disseminated through SpringerLink on the journal platform. They are also indexed on PubMed. And if they're part of a big educational project, we put them on microsites as well. And we send the podcast to podcast streaming services like Google and Spotify and Apple Music. Next slide, please. So as a big educational project last year, Springer Healthcare were tasked with educating healthcare professionals on the trial data that was presented from ASH in December. And as part of that project, ADIS created 7 podcasts where experts were talking through trial data in 7 different indications. They were published in Advances in Therapy, which is one of our flagship titles, and this is what they look like on the AIT website. So on the online first section, they look like regular articles. Oh, can you go back one, please, Peter? They look like regular articles, but when you click into them, there is a play button for listeners to listen to the podcast, and the transcript from the podcast is typeset and published with a DOI number in the regular journal issues. You can view the full podcast series from the link on the bottom of that slide there. And next slide, please. So the reason why I've raised this as my case study is that during the production of these podcasts, we've had some really great feedback from both the ADIS editors and also readers and listeners. So from the editor perspective, they were quite quick to produce, around 3 months from start to finish. And one of the reasons why they've been quite quick to produce is because we've found it quite easy to find authors willing to do the podcasts. And this is partially because we've not asked them to engage in a big writing project, but we've just asked them for half an hour of their time to talk about conference data that excites them. The editors really like the editorial independence of the grant-funded approach as well. And because the transcript is written up as an article, they have a DOI, which means they're findable, they're citable, and they will live forever. In terms of the feedback that we've had from our readers and listeners, they really like the peer-reviewed format, which has engendered trust and engagement with the content. But they also like the fact that this has been quite a fast way of getting conference data into the peer-reviewed literature. And they like the fact that they've been digestible on the go. So through the podcast streaming platforms, you can listen to it in your car or on your tablet while doing something else. But the text format has also been popular for those that prefer that visual learning style. And through the multiple platforms, they've been quite easy to find and share. So great for audience reach. We're really excited about Age's podcasts. So if you want any more information on these, please feel free to contact me on the information on this slide. But now I will hand over to Hamish.
Great, thank you very much, Caroline. So to introduce myself, I'm the Publishing Solutions Manager at Sage. My name's Hamish McDougall. I work across all of our STM titles and spend a lot of time looking at ways to improve visibility and access to research and our journals as well. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about microsites, and a lot of you might be asking what exactly is a microsite, but I'll go into a bit of detail now. But first of all, my details are on this slide in case you need to contact me, although you can also reach me on LinkedIn as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Peter. So a microsite is a landing page which we host on the Sage Journals platform, which acts as an educational resource page focused around a singular topic. Primarily, microsites are used as a way to share publications and educational information around a particular topic. Unlike some of the publication extenders or enhancement that we're discussing today, microsites are not focused around a single publication, rather they're used to promote a series of publication around a singular topic. It's a very, very flexible format, and we have a number of different widgets, which I can go through to demonstrate that. But for the purpose of this slideshow, I've broken up the site into small sections to kind of demonstrate the widgets. So in the top left corner, we have an introductory section, which really explains the purpose of the microsite. It's a blurb. The primary widgets for a microsite are the publication widgets, which we have different flavors of, but ultimately they help link out to publications. And you can see these in the top right-hand corner of the slide here. We have a number of other widgets as well, like the carousel, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, which allow us to link out to other types of content, whether that be video, book chapters, podcasts, or PowerPoint presentations. We can also promote journals and special issues using other widgets as well. Due to the highly customizable nature of a microsite, we have a lot of flexibility on what they can look like, and no two microsites are really the same. Microsites can also be sponsored by a company and can feature banner adverts and sponsor content, as well as peer-reviewed research too. So if we go on to the next slide, I've got two sets of statistics from two different microsites to discuss the impact microsites have on publications. So we're going to look at the number of people viewing the microsite and how many of those people then go on to view articles directly from the microsite. There are other metrics we could look at, but this is purely to demonstrate how much of an impact microsites make on publications. So our journal platforms allows us to directly measure whether people are accessing microsites from publications from the article or from the microsite. So we actually have quite detailed metrics on this. I've chosen our rare disease and coronavirus microsites because they really are opposite ends of the spectrum. Coronavirus has a huge interest and lots of research, whereas rare disease has less interest and less research. However, they both provide a useful idea of the impact of microsites. So starting with the coronavirus microsite, over the last 12 months, we've had over 200,000 visitors to our coronavirus microsite, and that's resulted in over 170,000 direct clicks to published coronavirus research articles hosted within Sage Journals. And moving on to the rare disease microsite, which is much newer, has been up for less than 2 months. We've received approximately 500 visitors and 102 direct links to published rare disease articles within Sage Journals. What's key for both of these microsites is that they're clearly very effective tool at driving people towards publications. Once people are on the sites, we can see that a good proportion of them do go on to access research within the platforms. Therefore, they are an incredibly effective way to disseminate and improve the visibility of research around a particular topic. So that's all I have to say about them directly, but do feel free to get in touch with me. And now I'm going to pass over to Kelly.
Thank you, Hamish. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here today and join the conversation. As noted here, I'm a senior editor with Taylor and Francis Group, and we publish about 2,700 research journals. Prior to joining Taylor and Francis a little over 4 years ago, I spent 15 years in the veterinary medicine industry. And what I really like about human medicine is that we're able to directly talk to our patients and they can talk to us and we can understand them. And so this is why I'm really passionate about plain language summaries and working to better communicate, not just with patients, but with all audiences. Next slide. At the end of 2019, Taylor and Francis gathered a working group together. We've been accepting plain language summaries for our journals for quite a few years, but we wanted to provide more clear guidance and make it quite clear to our authors and our sponsors that we did accept PLS and that we were happy to help them write them. But what we did first was spend a lot of time determining what was really important to authors and agencies and sponsors so that we could create guidelines that met their needs. And this slide shows some of those things that stakeholders found important, which included policies that encouraged PLS versus policies that made them mandatory, clear guidance on which articles should have a PLS versus what should be included in a PLS, and in addition, what was plain language. They also wanted to know where we stood on the inclusion of patients as authors and peer reviewers. They wanted to make sure we could index PLS on PubMed, which was pioneered by ADIS. And they wanted to also have the option to provide graphical PLS in addition to a text PLS. Really important was making sure they were accessible, that they were in front of a paywall or open access, and also findable on our website and through Google by appropriate metadata tagging. And finally, stakeholders felt it was important that we had metrics on the impact of their individual PLS. Next slide. Taking everything into consideration, well, first of all, I'll point out at the top of the slide is the link to our author services page and the PLS guidelines we produced. These were launched last month. And what does the future hold as we've gathered all this information and had a close look at plain language summaries? I won't read through all these lists, but I will point out a couple of really important things. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we need to continue working on our metrics so that we can provide metrics on individual plain language summaries and their impact. We need to better define patients' roles as authors and peer reviewers. We need to provide guidance on inclusivity so that we are using language that's diverse and promoting equality. We need to continue ongoing efforts to make plain language summaries more discoverable, especially for lay audiences, and whether that's through patient portals, plain language summary repository, or even the Joe's Future Science Group. Pardon me, I just had a moment there, but Future Science Group is now doing a journal that publishes plain language summaries, and that makes another way to find them. But finally, we also want to find continued consensus in the industry on plain language summaries, which is being done through the GPP4 guidelines, the Open Pharma Roundtable and Statement, and more articles that are coming out. So thank you so much. I look forward to your questions. I'm going to now pass this over to Joe.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm Joanne Walker, and I'm the Head of Publishing Solutions at the Future Science Group, an independent publisher of open access and hybrid journals. I'm going to share our experience of publishing infographics alongside articles. Next slide, please, Peter. So what is an infographic? So these provide an in-depth, visually engaging overview of the information presented in an article. Sometimes publishers also call these visual abstracts. They differ from a graphical abstract in that they are featured alongside the text, and they provide much more detailed information on the article. They are either created by our graphics team or are provided intact and as a fully designed abstract or infographic by the author. These are peer-reviewed, and we publish these as supplementary material where they're published alongside the article in front of any paywall, so accessible for anyone to read, even if the article is not open access. They can also be downloaded separately from the article as a PDF. We have also just started posting all supplementary material on Figshare, where they are assigned a DOI and can be citable in their own right. Infographics are also shared on social media when a paper is published. We've monitored various tweets over the past few months, looking at the effect of interaction on Twitter when the infographic is featured and when it is not. Although it is highly subject dependent, it does appear that including the infographic increases interaction, with more people clicking on the links and going on to read the article. The tweets with infographics also receive more impressions, on occasion by as much as 71%. Next slide, please. The case study I will present involves a specific type of infographic that we publish. So as a group, all our journals feature articles called clinical trial protocols, which are very much like the trials in progress presented at meetings like ASCO and ESMO, where the design and rationale of a trial is discussed. We saw that featuring infographics alongside clinical trial protocol articles was really beneficial, as readers could get an easy to read snapshot of the article being discussed. Authors also really like these as a tool to inform other potential investigators about the study. The infographics are simple for our team to create, following a templated structure with lots of sort of icons, etc., that are used in all the infographics and to really help the information stand out. Since we first introduced these in 2018, these types of articles have featured over 35 infographics to date. So with regards to the impact of including infographics on article metrics, we have some preliminary data. As I said, it is sort of article subject dependent, but we did a sort of comparison of 2 articles where we looked at 2 clinical trial protocol articles published in the same issue of Future Oncology. One article featured an infographic and one did not. So looking at the article metrics over a 3-month period, the article with the infographic received 3 times more downloads than the article without the infographic. So a repository of all the infographics that we've published can be found on our website that is listed on this slide. And we're also running a survey looking at how people use infographics and hope to be able to share the outcomes of this at a later date. So now over to Peter for the Q&A.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. That was excellent. So we've lost the slides. We're back to us. Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's really good to have some actual sort of case histories being presented in this way. You know, we've had lots of conversations in the past where we've talked about the principles. I'm a great one for standing there and saying it's just blindingly obvious that this stuff must work. I still think we're lacking a little bit in terms of evidence of this, but it's nice to be talking about some proper case histories, and thank you very much for sharing that. What we'd like to do now is just have an open discussion. I'm keen to get some input from the audience. So audience members, you've got a couple of text boxes. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you've got a chat button and a Q&A button. If you click either of those or both of those, you'll get the text boxes. So share with us your comments, your questions, your observations, and we'll weave that into the discussion over the next 20 minutes or so. Okay. For panelists, let's just kick it off. See where we end up. And I'm just going to start with a question sort of came in pretty much immediately about the sort of patient access to some of this content. I mean, what we're talking about here is increasing access of content to people, yeah, but the patients is an important group, and they're woven into a lot of what we've talked about. And as I say, Sheila's asked that sort of question: how accessible is it to patients, and how useful it is, which I think we'd all just go, yes, it must be very useful. Kelly, I'm going to come to you and ask you to talk a little bit about it, particularly in terms of PLS, where the terminology is a little bit confused. I think sometimes, plain language summaries is not necessarily just about patients, but let's pursue the patient angle for a minute. Just talk a little bit, if you can, about how you see it encouraging patient engagement and how you've seen patients engaging with the sort of content you do. Yeah.
I think one thing that's really struck me is over the past few years, we're really assaulted with a lot of false information, fake news, and patients are looking for peer-reviewed. Sometimes they don't understand what peer-reviewed means, but they're looking for actual facts based on evidence and from science. The problem is when they're accessing these manuscripts, if they even find them on places like PubMed, they don't necessarily understand what they're talking about. So plain language summaries put them into a language and text that they can understand. And as I always recommend when people ask me what is plain language, I said the best way to know if you've written a plain language summary so it meets your audience's needs is to have that audience read the plain language summary itself and tell you if they understand it, if it makes sense, and if when they read it, they understand what the findings were and what that means for them in their disease and the people they care for. I think that one of the key things is that we just need to continue working on making them more accessible so that patients can actually find them. And there's a lot of good initiatives in place that are doing that.
Okay, excellent. Caroline, I'm going to bring you in. Have you got some views on the place of PLS?
Yeah, certainly. I completely agree with Kelly. Absolutely, a really good test of a PLS is to ask the audience. I would say as well that we're finding at ADIS. I mean, we're making sure that we don't forget at ADIS that our primary audience is healthcare professionals, but of course we recognise that patients are increasingly accessing the literature. So we're trying to sort of strike the balance of making sure that our plain language summaries do fulfill this need as well. We're constantly talking to our editorial boards and authors who we are finding are under increasing pressure to keep up to date with the literature. I think there was a fact at ISMAP a couple of weeks ago that for a healthcare professional to keep on top of his or her field, they have to read up to 17 articles a day. Even like bravo anyone that does that, but people clearly aren't doing that, and it must mean that they are just skimming through the literature. And it's really important, as Kelly mentions, that experts and patients don't misinterpret the information by skimming it quickly. So I think PLS can really play a good part in this for all readers.
Okay, I'm just going to pursue this a little bit more because, as I say, there is confusion in terms of the audience that a PLS is aimed at. So let me ask a sort of maybe a stupid question, but if you're preparing your PLS and you're basically saying this is about patients, expert patients, non-specialists and so on. So how do you determine the sort of language that's used, the readability ages and so on? Is there some sort of techniques? Is there some way in which you think about that? Because it strikes me that a PLS for a lay patient, as it were, isn't going to be the same as for a GP, as a non-specialist. Or do you end up in a situation where you have multiple versions of your PLS? I mean, I'm going to switch. Joe, have you got a sort of view on that sort of aspect?
Well, I think for us, you have to sort of pitch it at the same. We don't do different versions for different audience. You pitch it at the same level. But I think that for any patient who is coming to find published literature is already quite well educated, so you have to pitch it at you pitch it at an audience that you expect to be to know how to read, not necessarily how to read, but how to read an article, rather than somebody who doesn't know anything at all. Because in the first instance, they wouldn't actually be looking at the published literature. They'd be looking at sort of NHS leaflets, that sort of thing, or patient organisation leaflets. So you have to pitch it up. You have to know already that your patient will have some background knowledge about the condition, etc. But you still have to sort of pitch it at, I think it's a certain like age. There's a recommended age grade in the US that you sort of pitch. I think Kelly mentions in their guide it's like 14 to 18 or something like that. You pitch the language at. But I think this it so varies amongst everyone who's providing it PLS that there does need. I mean, people like ISMAP or maybe need to sort of come up with some recommendations, and sort of that's the industry standard. That is what we all provide the PLS. That is how we do them. I think that's just what's needed at this moment. Hopefully maybe something will come out in GPP4. We don't know.
Oh, okay, and GPP4 is coming, of course, and they've said that they are including that in there. Just picking up, and maybe Hamish, you could come on because you're involved. You have PLS as well, don't you? If that's the right way of phrasing that. But there's a question, in fact, a couple of questions coming in about translations, and maybe picks up on a point which maybe we've already covered in terms of multiple versions. But the questions are specifically about: do you produce them in different languages other than English? Any thoughts about differences in English between UK, Australia, New Zealand, USA, South Africa, and so on? So how do you, can you talk to that one a little bit, Hamish, in terms of multiple versions, translations and so on?
So, I mean, we do primarily publish English language journals. However, we do work with lots of agencies who do have the ability to translate. So, I mean, it is technically possible to have a PLS in another language and potentially attach that to an article as supplementary material. I mean, given the fact that we primarily publish in English, there could be some problems for some journals as well with that. But that's not to say that we can't necessarily have a plain language summary hosted somewhere else on the journal website. So, for example, we have lots of repositories for videos, special collections, and that kind of things on the Sage Journals platform. So there's no reason we couldn't do the same with something like plain language summaries, and then have multiple language plain language summaries on there as well.
Okay, but primarily we're talking English. And just looking at the rest of you, I'm trying to interpret your nods and so on. Is that the same for all of you? Are you able to? Do you actually publish in multiple translations and so on? Joe, have you? Oh, sorry, Caroline, you're going to say something. Go on.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah. Short answer is yes. We get more and more inquiries about this, and not just for plain language summaries, but actually translations of articles. So similar to what Hamish said, that we have on occasion published like full translations of the article in a different language in the supplementary material section. We could certainly do that for PLS. I think Figshare's a really good repository for that. I'm sure we've done it in the past where you have the PLS in English, but then you also have the PLS in maybe French and other languages too.
Oh, okay. Because I thought there were some practical limitations here in terms of what you could do on that front, but is that not the case?
I can speak for Taylor and Francis, and what we do is both for manuscripts and for plain language summaries, we offer translation services, or the authors can provide a translated version. And as Caroline said, we host those as supplementary materials on Figshare. And I'd like to see down the road being able to co-host the plain language summaries in multiple languages in front of the paywall, but because our supplementary materials are also free to view, they're at least accessible at this point.
Okay. I must admit, and I'm being. Oh, sorry. Go on, Jay. Go on. You.
I was just going to say that as publishing platforms, we are sort of quite constrained on the actual platform that we use to publish our journals. So, I mean, we've looked into being able to publish PDFs in different languages, and we use a company called Atipon, and they just cannot do that. So, I think publishers want to do it, but we don't necessarily have the technology at the moment to do it.
So, which in fairness is what I was sort of thinking when I was trying to sort of like tease that out a little bit. A lot of these things are great to talk about, but it's whether the practicalities actually are there. But having said that, you're open to the idea, and there are ways around that. You know, you can link to other content and so on. So that's good. And another question just popped in about how do you decide which languages to translate into? I'm guessing there's an element of, if somebody asks or they want it, we might try and go that way rather than there being some sort of a standard operating procedure. Is that the way it's looking?
And I would say what the authors have a preference, especially if the plain language summary is directed toward an audience in a particular country or particular region, that would kind of help us determine the best translation languages to use.
Okay.
We had an example recently. It wasn't a plain language summary, but it was I think it was a patient physician perspective, where like half the articles were written by the patient and half by a healthcare professional, and it happened to be a French patient talking about it's a dermatological indication, and so the patient was interviewed, so we have like an embedded video abstract, so it would be ridiculous to ask that patient to try and speak in English. So I think the interview was in French, but it had English subtitles, which fulfilled, the public. We are an English journal, so it has to be in English, but there's nothing to say that you can't mix it with.
All right, cool. I mean, there's a sort of go on, Hamish. Sorry,
just while we're on this topic as well, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm sure this is true for all the publishers as well, but we regularly do local editions of some of our journals as well. So, for example, Multiple Sclerosis Journal, we publish regularly in different languages as well. And so, if there were plain language summaries within that journal, that would also be translated alongside the actual manuscripts themselves.
Okay, cool. I mean, one of the obvious points, if you're talking about accessibility to content, language is a clear point, isn't it? And there's lots of different languages. So how far you go with it might be a question mark, but in principle, you must want to translate and make it accessible, because that's sort of what we're trying to do. One thing I was going to say, which I'm going to be a little bit careful because I'm not quite sure exactly the context with which what I was watching the other day, but on social media there was an argument, and quite a cross argument, about from somebody saying this is just ridiculous. There's a PLS behind a paywall, and again, that to me did just seem ridiculous. I guess we're all just going to nod and go, yeah, if PLS, the point is to allow access to it, sort of thing. But again, there's probably practical issues in there in terms of how open access your content is. But a PLS, surely by definition, you'd expect it to be out there. And I'm guessing mostly that applies to the enhancements that we're sort of talking about here. Let's not just get bogged down in PLS here, because we could have an entire session on that sort of thing. Let's go off in a slightly different direction. Let's pick up on Caroline and the podcasting, if I can, because that sounds great to me. And specific question that I'm sort of intrigued about. So again, it's practicalities of this. You made a very clear point that your podcasts are peer reviewed. Practically speaking, how does that work? Are you giving the peer reviewer a transcript, or are you just saying, while you're driving next week, have a listen to it? Sort of, how does it practically work with the peer review process, Caroline?
Well, it's a great process. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because you're right, and so many people don't think about these. There are many sort of technical things that us publishers have to work out behind the scenes. Which could go on forever about that. But so for our podcasts, there's a 2-stage peer review process. So the first step is we get an outline. We work with the author with an outline to say, okay, what are we going to discuss in this podcast? And it'll be like a bulleted outline of, okay, we're going to touch on this data. These are the key points that we're going to hit. And that is peer review. So that's like a text version. Partly we do this because, especially for the unsolicited ones, we don't want someone to create a whole podcast, then to peer review an audio, and then peer review says, oh no, you need, this is a bit too this or that, and have to re-record it. So the text version is the first thing that gets peer reviewed. And then once that outline has been approved, then the podcast is taped, the transcript is written up, and then the peer reviewer gets the audio and the transcripts so that they can choose which version they look at. And the second peer review is really to check that the presenters have not gone off topic. They have kept to the agreed content and tone. Yeah, so that's how it works.
Okay. And just there's a couple of questions coming in on specifically on yours, Caroline, the podcast. So Dawn's asking, coming back to the patients actually, I guess the patients or the lay audience. Dawn's saying, have you ever done a podcast in lay language aimed at presenting Congress summaries to lay audiences, including patients? Is that an area you've done much work in?
We never say never, for sure.
Okay.
I mean, we've not commissioned or published any specific patient audience podcast, but I think it's a really good idea. I think if someone approached us with the right proposal, then we'd certainly consider it. It could work, just thinking off the top of my head, it could work for chronic diseases where there's a very engaged patient population, like multiple sclerosis, for example, diabetes. So yeah, I think the podcast is a really new and exciting thing. So yeah, I'd love to explore it more and what we can do with them.
Okay, and before I go on, just another specific question that's come in here. I'm just losing it slightly, but it's here somewhere. So James is asking, with the podcasts, is it strictly limited to the reviewed text, or is there the opportunity to have a more natural conversation? So, well, how do you answer that sort of a question? Do you go, there's a script and that's it, or can you just go, let's have a couple of people chattering away and that will be fine? How does that work from a peer review point of view?
So I think we need a careful balance, because yeah, we don't want a podcast that is going to be people reading off an approved script, which would sound stilted, and then you might as well just not bother. So we want it to be natural, but at the same time, peer review is a really important part. And I think, as we mentioned before, I mean, this is the trustworthy nature of the journals comes from the peer reviewed aspects. So the once that outline has been approved, so that's really designed. It's not designed to be like a word for word, okay, author, this is what you're going to have to talk about, but it's just to keep them on track. They need to make sure that things are presented in a fair and balanced way, and they're not going off on some kind of like tangents.
Okay, because at the end of the day, at the heart of this is an article. So
yeah,
exactly.
Article.
It's not a magazine-y community sort of an environment in which you're chattering away about stuff. This is about representing the article in a fair and balanced way. That's what you're trying to achieve. That's what the peer review process is trying to achieve, and so on. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about it, like podcasts are really just audio commentaries, and all publishers publish commentaries, which are expert opinions. So we've just put it in audio format, but we'd be remiss not to peer review that to make sure that someone wasn't being too controversial.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Sorry, just before we move on from podcasts, have any of the other panelists got any specific experience of podcasts there? Have you done podcasts, Hamish? Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of podcasts. What I really like them about them compared to other digital enhancements is the longevity of them. So when we've pulled stats from podcasts that go back 5 years ago in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, we've seen like hundreds of plays even recently. So unlike papers or other things, they really do have longevity, and they drive people back to those articles or that content again. So yeah, I'm a huge fan.
Okay. And James, sorry, Hamish, let's lead into you and microsites. We've got a question coming from Jonathan, which I think is getting at the point which I would always be interested in terms of, you talked about metrics and visitors and article clicks and so on. Just how, I think what he's getting at here is, what's the granularity? I mean, how do you really know exactly what sort of people are looking at a microsite or clicking through to an article and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting question and not a simple one to answer. So obviously, when we build a microsite, we free up access to all of the articles on there. So it's even if it's a subscription journal, we make the article open access as well. And when you have an open access audience, it's much more difficult to understand who's clicking on it. We obviously have the raw data of the numbers of who's clicking on it. But if people are signed in to our journal platform, then we have a good idea of who the subscriber is. Atapon does have Atapon Smart Groups as well, which gives you some idea of the type of people actually clicking on the articles as well. But it's not a complete picture, and it's something that we're doing a lot of work at Sage over the next kind of year or two, is to understand our audience better. And it's an ongoing process. And I can't say much more at the moment because, you know, it's very early days, but yeah, I'm sure all the publishers feel the same as well.
I mean, it does. I mean, I always say this sort of thing, and it's always a bit simplistic thing, and I can always say it. You know, metrics is very dangerous in the wrong hands, sort of thing. You know, people to think on the internet we can measure everything, whereas you can't, sort of thing. And there's no way of knowing if Peter Llewellyn came in to look at something unless you've actually said to Peter Llewellyn, tell us that you're there, sort of thing. And I think some people tend to sort of miss that point. If you do ask me, and I do engage and sign into something, then tracking me can lead to some very interesting results. But you sort of have to understand that it's not some sort of magic type thing happening there. A couple more questions on, again, a couple of questions coming in on specifically with microsites, just from Hamish. Elizabeth asking, do microsites have a shelf life? The sort of microsite you've talked about, does it have a shelf life?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it really depends on the type of microsite. Our educational microsites, like the coronavirus or the rare disease microsites, they are consistently updated all the time and maintained by Sage. For the sponsored ones, because they are continuously promoted by our marketing team, they do have a shelf life because they require constant maintenance, constant marketing and constant updating. So that's also dependent on the client's wishes as well.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm going to stick with you just for a moment and just cover off this question from Anne Claire. And she's asking about, how do you feel about publications being linked from a pharma-sponsored website without journal oversight? So I guess she's got a community type. I mean, you know, we've all seen a community type site built by a pharma company. Presumably they can link into your content. Or are you worried about that in some way? I don't know. She's asking whether you're worried without any journal oversight of that. What's your comment on that?
I mean, ultimately, there is journal oversight because these articles were selected by the journal in the first place.
So that's
and we are the ones building the microsite. And, you know, we do work with the companies, obviously, and we work very closely with them, and we align our brand, the journal brand, the society brand, all together with them. So I'd say it's inaccurate to say that there's no journal oversight because they are still peer-reviewed articles hosted on the Sage Journals platform. It's just that we are providing another place to host them, which is the microsite.
No, but just to be specific, I think what AC is talking about is a completely separate site where they're building some content and then they're linking back over to you and bring content. So, but your point would remain that you've still got
themselves. I mean, ultimately, it's still a peer-reviewed article. So if they link to that, I mean, there's no issue with that. It's still, you know, it's still part of the journal. It's still peer-reviewed. We don't have much control over that.
And ultimately you don't have any control of what they do, but you're starting with your peer-reviewed article, which is to your quality and all the rest of it. Anybody else doing anything with microsites, or have you got different, I don't know, there's some different terminology used for these sorts of sites and things. Anybody else? Caroline, you're nodding. Have you got that sort of approach?
Yeah, certainly the medical education teams do those, and yeah, it can be so useful. I really like, Hamish, I like your example with the rare diseases. I think we maintain a couple of educational platforms in that field, and yeah, for things like rare diseases, they can be brilliant, where you need, you know, you really do need to collate information on a particular thing. So yeah, the microsites are helpful. We also have some educational platforms called Medicine Matters, where sometimes sponsors will, you know, ask us to curate and collate articles in certain fields, and then we'll add in expert videos. In fact, the podcast articles were part of not necessarily a microsite, but an educational platform a bit like that, where it was taking key data. So the podcasts were just one jigsaw piece puzzle, and then there were expert interviews, and they might pull peer-reviewed literature into that over time as well. So yeah, really a big fan of microsites.
Okay,
yeah,
so again,
I was going to say,
go on.
Sorry. I was going to say that getting back to the COVID angle, that we have a microsite at Taylor and Francis that is just all of our COVID manuscripts that have been published. They're all free to read, and we call it the COVID Resource Center, and I'm sure that all publishers are doing that and making that available. But it's been an incredible resource for the community because I don't have to look for the COVID. manuscripts, papers, literature, that it's all in one place and searchable. Again.
Okay, that was the point I think I was going to sort of try and make, is it's an obvious point again, but if you're increasing accessibility to content, then part of the answer is to put the same sort of content together in a place where someone can easily find it, sort of stating the obvious there. Joe, you look like you wanted to say something there as well, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying that we do the same thing. So on our journal platform, we do sort of collections of different types of articles, all collected in one place. You don't have to go through all the different journals to look for the similar types of articles. They're all in one place. And then we also, like Caroline, like Springer, we have sort of educational website. We call them digital hubs in sort of therapeutic areas.
Okay.
Where we sort of put journal articles and also sort of independent content, etc. So that's just sort of another way for our readers to sort of get additional information about sort of publications. It could be that somebody does a publication in us and then they do an interview on our Oncology Central Hub, that sort of thing. So it's just another way, again, of how we can extend content as well.
Okay. Well, now I've come to you. Let's pursue the infographics for a moment. Yeah, I mean, it was a nice little couple of slides you presented with your case histories there. Again, it's one of those things. Infographics just seem to me to be blindingly obvious. Are you seeing a lot more interest in generating infographics? And what I'm sort of interested at a very practical, blunt level is, if I'm preparing a paper, can I prepare the infographic and submit it and send it, or do you do it, or is it like either or? Is there a service in there? I don't know, just practically speaking, how does it work?
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot more interest. And as I said, we do these sort of clinical trial protocols, and there's a lot of interest in those, just because they sort of help really find a nice summary of the clinical trial. But so we offer both, so authors can sort of submit them as is. Okay. And depending on the quality, we might do a little bit of polishing just to make it look a bit pretty, or we might just publish it as is. But we also have a graphics team in-house, and we can also develop them from scratch. So we offer the service, sort of an infographic creation service, where we can take certain points from the manuscript, we sort of like peer review it, and then we can turn it into an infographic. And we sort of try, I sort of work with our graphical designer to sort of, it's really nice to sort of say, can we do this? How would it look like this? And then she represents it, and it's like, oh my God, it's amazing. So yeah, that's really really nice. I mean, I really like infographics. They're my sort of favorite thing to learn from. I like colors. That's how I learn. So it's just really easy for me. Yeah.
But it is, I mean, at the risk of being slightly provocative, I'm not sure if it is particularly provocative. Infographics can completely fail. I mean, but it's a nice idea, and I can sit and sketch something out, but that's not going to be terribly useful. Doing decent infographics is a skill, isn't it? It's not just draw a picture, Peter, and send it to me. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, you need to make sure that the whole article is represented. You're not sort of cherry picking the information. And also you need to sort of figure out how somebody's going to read the infographic. Are they going to go sort of left to right, bottom, that sort of thing? And yeah, there's, it's just everything. If you've got a circle, make sure that you're following it around clockwise. There's just loads of different things that you need to be aware of, and like different colors that go with each other, formats, everything. So
again, there's a review process in there. If Peter Llewellyn submits a manuscript which is brilliant, but has sketched something on the back of an envelope that you don't think is brilliant, you'll kick back against that, presumably. And I'm sort of stating the obvious here, but the infographic has to work properly. It's not just a picture.
Well, yes, exactly.
We'll disagree on that one.
Yeah,
okay. I'm not explaining that very well. I'm not making a very good point there, and I'm doing it in a bad way. So let's. But what else? I mean, again, comment from everybody else in terms of infographics. Do we like it? Kelly, you were putting your hand up there.
I would say the beauty of infographics is that we can use them in a variety of ways. So we can have like a graphical plain language summary, a graphical abstract. So a lot of people think of infographics as just being a figure in a manuscript or article, but there's a lot of different ways to use them. And that's what we found even with plain language summaries, where we have text ones submitted so that we can index them on PubMed. We almost very often have a graphical, an image of some sort that also represents the plain language summary submitted alongside it.
Okay. Anyone's got a comment? Hamish, it looks like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I absolutely love infographics. I think they're maybe my favorite digital enhancement. I think they're fantastic. And even from a practical perspective, they're very, very easy to put together by the experts. We have a great team who do that, and they can do one in 7 days, and they're very cost effective compared to some other digital enhancements. So, if you're working to a tight budget as a pharmaceutical company, you don't have to spend a lot of money to really sort of jazz up your article quite heavily with an infographic.
Okay. I just want to, so we're running out of time as usual. So I want to just finish on this question that's come in from Charlotte, which is, I think, quite a useful point to finish on. So she's asking about who's owning the publication extenders, publishers, authors, whatever, who needs to be contacted for reuse and repurposing, what's the best copyright license, and so on. Can we just to have this as a final topic, and from each of you talk a little bit about it? Who wants to kick off first? Anyone going to put their hand up, or Kelly, go on, you hand it up.
I'll go on. I always say talk to the journal editor, because especially when you're working with a publisher, every journal has a different variety of licenses or publication agreements that they offer. So if you can talk to the editor and say, this is how I am planning to use this is how I would like to use it, we can try to work with you. And then it's also, even if we have a more restrictive, like say an open access license that doesn't allow commercial use, you can get permission to use it commercially. So I think the key takeaway is that publishers, we want to work with you so that you've created this content. We want you to be able to use it. We want to encourage you to use it. So have that discussion. And I'm a very big proponent of making it as accessible as possible, being open access. If literature is behind a paywall, at least making the abstract, plain language summary, other materials free to read, so in front of the paywall.
Excellent. Okay. At the risk of you all saying the same sort of thing, and so to close it down, but has anyone else got a comment on this sort of question from Charlotte in terms of the copyright type issues? Hamish,
sure.
looks like you're going to...
Yeah, no. So what I would say is, for our open access journals, particularly talking about video abstracts, is that the copyright actually belongs to the authors, in at least for the case for Sage journals. So we don't have any restrictions about how that can be used. So it's really up to the authors. I mean, so if they want to use those in presentations or on conference stands, it's really down to the authors what goes on with that. And we publish CC BY NC even. So it works.
Okay, got you. Caroline, Joe, have you got another comment on that? Or
I just want to say, I want to say the same as Kelly, really. I'd encourage everyone to, even before you start the feature, think about how you want to reuse it, and then talk to the publisher. The license, certainly for the license with ADIS, for the features replicates whatever the license is for the article. So a lot of ours are the CC BY NC licenses, but talk to us about reuse. You can always buy a license to reuse it if you want to reuse it in a commercial setting. But we want to help you to reuse that, so we'll try our best to do that for you.
Okay. Go on then, Joe. I'm all inclusive here, so you've got an opportunity to say a final few words on that one before we wrap up. Have you got something to say?
I was just going to say that for sort of any sort of digital content that an author provides, they basically give us the right to publish it. So they retain the rights to all that content, and they can do whatever they want with it, but they just sort of say you can publish it alongside our manuscript. So they don't have to come to us for permission to use it, because it's their content in the first place. So same as any other sort of supplementary material that's published alongside our articles.
Okay, that's quite clear. So look, we are slightly over time, so I'm going to wrap things up now and say a huge thank you to you guys. Members of the audience, don't rush away, because we are going to have another 10 minutes or so to answer some questions. But thank you very much for joining us. Big thank you to the panelists, to all of you. And I can say on your behalf, I know that people are welcome to contact you via LinkedIn, or you provide your email address. The important point I was going to make, which follows on from what I think at least if you've all said it, basically, talk to the publishers sort of thing. And for what it's worth, I just wanted to make the point that, you can all nod at this, but you are the right people to talk to at your publishers, aren't you? So we've got the relevant people online today, guys. So do take advantage of this opportunity to reach out to these guys and talk to them. You'd rather they talk to you and work out things than just send you something out of the blue that's not appropriate, I guess, is what it comes down to. So big thank you to everybody. I'm just going to, so I should say, from my point of view, if anyone's interested in what's happening at MedComms and these sorts of webinars, come to medcommsnetworking.com. You'll find all the plans there, kept bang up to date. If you like these sorts of webinars, then go to NetworkPharma TV. If you've missed any, there's now more than 300 videos, so there's a great content resource developing there. I'm always very happy to help if I can, if anyone's interested in MedComms. But on that note, I'd like to say huge thanks to the panelists once more. We're all going to give a little wave and say goodbye, but as I say, audience members, you can stick around and we'll carry on talking. So bye bye for today. Bye.